Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Watson Michael from Ceylon Institute of English and Leadership. And once again, we are honored to have one of the best business book authors, Steve Silbiger, who has authored the 10-Day MBA, which has sold over 650,000 copies worldwide. Steve, welcome
Yes.
back.
Well, thank
How
you
are you
for
doing?
inviting me.
Great. So it's a new year, Steve, right? So can you give us an update of what's been happening to the new edition since we
Uh,
met a few months ago?
the edition has been published. It's in the major bookstores of Barnes and Noble, which is the biggest book chain here in the United States. It's also appeared in airports in the United States at the airport bookstores, and it's been selling well. Uh, Amazon is covering it, sells the book. They've been heavily discounting it. So if any of your viewers buy it through Amazon, it's been discounted from the price. So that's exciting. And then because of the good reception, uh, my Chinese publisher has our my Chinese publisher is translating the book into Chinese, and they're negotiating the deal so that once again the Chinese edition will come out whenever, on their timeline. The publisher is named CITIC, CITIC, and they've done it all four times and have done well with it. So that's the big deal. I'm happy that it continues to sell. I've gotten good feedback, and yeah, I'm happy with it.
Great, okay, good to hear that. So, can you share a memorable experience you had while researching for the 10-Day MBA?
One of the new areas in the back of the book, the last chapter are like mini courses, and one of the parts in the back of the book, it's a called the 10-Day MBA movie guide, the top 15 quotable quotes. And so I had a lot of fun watching a lot of business related movies, and I write some of the top quotes of business movies in the back of the book. So say somebody brings it up while at work, at the water cooler, so to speak, if those still exist, and or people are writing about different movies or quoting movies. This is the top 15, at least what I consider, from the movie Wall Street to The Godfather to Boiler Room, The Wolf of Wall Street, and other things like that. Um, just, there's one very famous movie that was from 1992, Glengarry Glen Ross. It's a very famous movie about salesmanship, and their idea for salesmen, they have to be ABC, always be closing the deal, ABC. And I had a lot of good times just, going through it and deciding which 15, I wanted to at first have 10, but I go, by having only 10, I'm leaving out a few good ones. So I kept with 15. Like in 2016, there was a movie called The Founder. It was about the founding of McDonald's. One of the quotes in that book, which I love, if you got a time to lean, you have time to clean. So if somebody's working in a food restaurant, if they're just laying around not working, they have time to clean. So that it's just one of these quotes that may come up. And so there you go. It's a good part. It's a bonus part of the new book. People might like it, talk amongst themselves. So it's good.
Yeah,
And
so
people and I've gotten emails from readers already about it, about what they think the better quote is, not what's in here. And so, you know, maybe in a new edition, in another 5 or 7 years, I'll have to make the top 20 quotes, not the top 15. So, and it's kind of odd, like 15 is an odd number. And like the top 10 business schools, if you really look at it, it's not the top 10. There's really 15 of the top business schools in the United States at least. So it's a good list.
Yeah, so Ray Kroc, right? I mean, the founder. Okay, it's one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yes.
Okay, right? So this guy, I mean, Ray Kroc. I mean, the way he's persistent, right? And he's not giving up.
No. I'll read his quote, Ray Kroc's quote.
Yeah.
Business is war. It's dog eat dog, rat eat rat. If my competition were drowning, I'd walk all over and I'd put a hose right in his mouth. Pretty intense. So he was a very competitive person. He didn't come up with the idea of McDonald's, but he's the one who came up with the idea to franchise it all over the world. So he's pretty much responsible for the company McDonald's that we see today. So there you go. It's an interesting piece. Yeah, the book is jammed full of that type of stuff. And like what we talked about last month was, about cryptocurrency. It's over $100,000 a Bitcoin now. Not to say that a Bitcoin's worth anything, but if people want to pay $100,000, somebody's going to make money, somebody's going to lose money. You know, it doesn't follow any reason. So it's interesting.
Very true. Very true. So let's go into economics, right? One
Okay,
of my favorite
economics.
chapters, right? So,
Okay, that's your interest. Yes.
so what is GDP and why can't countries just print more money when they need it?
Okay. GDP is gross domestic product. It's the total value of goods and services that a country produces. So it's pretty straightforward. Uh, Although it's an imprecise measure because it's is only good as the country's economic um, scorekeepers, the government's statistics. It's kept by the government, so it's only as good as the government's statistics. Similar to communist countries, you really don't know what China's GDP is or Russia's for real, that you can make guesses. But in the United States, it's pretty straightforward. It's not a political thing. And then your next question is, why can't you just print money? Well, in the United States, because the world currency is the dollar, we have the privilege of just printing money, pretty much. That's what happened during the COVID era. They literally printed up $8 billion, created $8 trillion in money to make sure that we didn't go into a depression. When you're a smaller country, you can't just print money because to print money, you have to uh, borrow it from investors, and then you have to use it for your purposes. But if you can't pay it back, then the interest rates on that money go up. And because the United States is the fiat currency, so to speak, that's what they call it, the world currency, we got to change yeah, what our interest rates are because we're the main currency of the world. If you're a smaller currency, you're dependent on always being converted into the dollar to buy things from other countries. And so you're limited by one, you know, what your interest rates are going to be. And interest rates are also based off inflation. So if you print a bunch of money, you're going to have inflation. In the United States, they printed a lot of money, like I just said, and our inflation, which was like next to zero, 1%, 2%, went up to 9% during COVID. It's back down to 2.5%, somewhere down. It's come back. But the reason is they printed a bunch of money. And if you have more money chasing the same goods, you're going to have inflation. So that's what holds you back from absolutely printing as much money as you want because it devalues the money. That would be my answer.
Wow, okay. Now, based on what you said, what determines how much one country's currency is worth compared to another?
Well, that's that's an interesting question. One of it could be, the perception of stability between two countries could be one. Two, it could also be the difference in inflation. So, like if one has higher inflation compared to another country, the high inflation currency would be worth less. And like I said, in political instability also makes a country's currency worth less. Also, the amount of demand for the currency. So, for instance, if many people are using and wanting to buy things from a certain country, they would need to use the local currency to buy it. So, there would be demand for that currency. Therefore, the currency would be more valuable. It's just like supply and demand. There are some countries that try to uh, make it consistently the same amount of exchange rate, but in the long run, you can't. The other factors, will overwhelm it in good time. And that's been proven. They call that a peg to a currency, like a peg to the dollar. And that, it works for a little bit, but it doesn't work over the long period.
Right, pretty insightful. Right.
Yeah.
So,
And the odd thing is in Europe, you have the euro, and each of those countries used to have their own currency. So by going together as one large currency, that each country doesn't have as much control over the value of their own currency because they've given it up. That's why England has stayed with the pound. They did not want to have to go with the euro. But all those other countries, they are constrained by, again, they can't overspend, they can't affect and print money, so to speak, because if they try to pay back that money, it will become with at higher interest rates, it will become prohibitive to do it. So there's a lot of things going on. Can you tell me about Sri Lanka? What kind of currency do they have?
so we have a rupee, a Sri Lankan rupee.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So, yep.
Has it been worth more or less in recent times?
Well, a couple of years back, it was getting weak, but since of late now, the dollar is it's appreciating against the dollar.
Okay. In what reason is that?
So things are getting better now at the moment. Things are getting
Better.
slowly better at the moment, but still there is poverty in the country. But things are improving, and step by step, things are improving.
So you're saying that there's more social stability.
Well, there is a decent amount of social stability, but it is improving gradually. So it'll
Okay.
take some time. So a new government came in. So majority of the people voted for them. So we are hoping for some change in time to come.
Okay. Good changes.
Good changes, absolutely.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
So, yeah. So, apart from taxes, How can the government earn revenue?
Well, it's a good question because our new president in the United States, Donald Trump, he believes in protectionism. And to affect that, you have high tariffs. And tariffs is a way to raise revenue. Uh, and so, for instance, I'm going to be my business at work. We're going to be importing um, a handbag, and that handbag has a 42% tariff on it. So, for every dollar of this good of these new goods, I have to put 42 cents to pay the government to import it. So the incentive is not to import it from China. It's the incentive is to make in the United States, but we don't have the people who cut and sew and make handbags here at a competitive price. So the only people who suffer are the local businesses and the consumers if I have to charge a higher dollar. So that's one way. You can charge, governments can charge fees for various things, uh, for for documentation, for government services, they can charge fees. To go to the national parks, you can charge fees. There's different fees you can charge, transaction fees for trading stocks. There's many different ways they can do that. Those are some way they can raise revenue. And the and like you said, with taxes, you can you can give tax credits, you can give tax breaks, but you can also raise the taxes on other people for different things by restricting their deductions on their income. So it gets complicated. And for every deduction, for every tax break, there's politics involved, and there's a reason why it's there. So the incoming president will like to give a lot of tax breaks to rich people and moderate income people and to anybody, and does not want to raise any other fees other than tariffs, but wants to reduce our deficits. So and not reduce spending, of course. And so if you don't reduce spending and you collect less taxes, that makes your deficit larger. It's just math, but apparently the United people in the United States somehow believe it. So we'll see. We'll see.
All right, so that's a bit interesting. Okay, right. So the 2008 financial crisis caused a lot of economic chaos globally. And what can people learn from it?
Ah, because I lived through it here in the United States, you know, I wasn't impoverished by it, but what happened here, it showed that the banking system without regulation goes to always the extreme. Without regulation, businesses, banking go to extremes, and they need to have rules to guide them. And what happened in the 2008 financial crisis was they were giving so many loans to a lot of unqualified people. And so those people, when they couldn't pay off their loans, defaulted on their loans, and there was a banking crisis. There was also, and I explain it in the book, there was a lot of speculation on those loans. So a lot of people were betting that those loans were going to go bad. Other people were betting that those loans would be good. And there were many multi-billionaires that guessed correctly that things would go badly. Uh, you know, just only few months before the banking crisis, people that were average people would buy a second house and rent it and fix up bad housing, and then rent it. And there were always more people to buy it once it was done. And interest rates were artificially low. based off the risk. And so many people here in the United States were into flipping houses because they could borrow cheaply, they weren't credit worthy, and they were always thinking somebody else will buy that next house. And once the music stopped, that was the crisis of 2008. Uh, the things that have happened after that, our housing pricing here are really expensive. And when the crash happened, large investors bought up many of the houses that young people and regular Americans used to buy, and they've been bought up by large corporations. And it's just sad, but it shows you that there needs to be regulation. The government does have a function in regulating banks. And it's, I think that's a major lesson. Given half a chance, banks will do badly. There, and it happens periodically. Like whenever a bank thinks that they're making a large amount of loans without risk, there are risks. Like I believe it was in the 1990s that there were large loans to South American and Central American countries. They all went bad, and that caused a crisis back in the 90s. So every time there's some mania like Bitcoin, it always ends poorly. It always ends poorly when reality sets in. Like, for instance, with the new president, he doesn't want to regulate Bitcoin, but eventually, when it does come back down and they're big losers, they're going to cry. They're going to go to government, and then the politicians will create regulations to bring it in. And the same thing happened with banking. There was a lot of crying, there was problems, and they called government, and government made a lot of regulations to control the banks on how much they can lend, what credit worthiness they could accept, and that type of thing. So it's human nature. It's human nature.
Yeah, interesting and insightful, Steve. Okay, so this reminds me at the moment the US is giving, I think they're having some issues with the corporate real estate loans also. I read some time back. So small banks will have a challenge going forward.
They
Okay.
do. And because the smaller the bank, they people see that they're more risky. And if you're going to deposit your money, if you're depositing in a large bank, the possibility of it going bankrupt is very small. In a smaller bank, it isn't. There was a large default on relatively smaller banks in the United States. It was the last couple of years, and they all related to Silicon Valley in California, because all their loans were very concentrated in one industry. And when a few of those loans went bad, they uh, they went under as well. But the government did come in. The government did save those banks to protect the banking system. But it takes a large government with a lot of money to do that. And in other countries, they don't have that ability to do that. United States can't because they can print money. They literally print money. So that's why, because we're the fiat currency of the world. So we don't have the discipline that another country would have. Like Argentina, for instance, is a great example. The government spent for all these social programs and borrowed, and then finally they couldn't pay back these loans. So what are you going to do? You have to default on your loans, or have them restructured or what have you, because the money came from somewhere else, the United States. The United States makes their own money.
Super insightful, right? So, any final message to all our viewers and listeners out there
Yes.
who want to become an author?
Oh, well, the first thing that you want to do is have a really good idea, an idea that nobody else is doing when you research it. uh, that is key because so many people can publish books nowadays. So a good search of Google for your idea to make sure that nobody else is doing it. And if they're doing it, you're doing it in a new and different way. That would be number one. And I believe wholeheartedly if somebody has something new that's totally new, there will be publishers that would be willing to publish it. Um, my MBA book, at the time, there was a book called The Portable MBA, and it was written by teachers, and it was boring, and it was not clear, and it didn't have, what my book has. And it was evident when my agent presented it to the first publisher, they wanted it. It was obvious. And so if you're a writer, especially for nonfiction or business books, if it's a new subject, then you have a good chance. If you're writing fiction, that's another story. That's pure talent. That's pure talent. But even in that realm, you want to have a new twist, a fresh voice, uh, something that makes it stand out. And a good title doesn't hurt. A good title does not hurt. So that would be my advice for aspiring authors. And also, if you're an aspiring author, have a group of fellow writers so that you can, critique each other's writing before you meet somebody. Like when when I met uh, my first publisher, my book had been reviewed by other people. So you want to put your best foot forward so that when you actually talk with the industry, you have a really good product to give them, which is, you don't like, you may know somebody in the industry, you may know publishers, family, friends, whatever. But then if you present them with this book that's horrible, you wrecked your chance. So it's good to have your own group of fellow writers to, one, brainstorm ideas, and two, to make sure that your writing is the best that it possibly can be before you approach industry for it with your book. That would be my number one. And then once you have your idea and you have developed a little bit, then you want to network to a current author or an agent. And that's the way that you get a book published. Yeah. Not just sending the book out, not just sending query letters. It's all of my success has been because I knew somebody who knew somebody that was in the publishing industry. And just like business, it's good to know somebody, you know, have an expert, have an in the industry. And so that would be my number one and number two advice to aspiring authors.
Well, pretty interesting, right? And pretty insightful. Okay. Hopefully, I always had a wish of writing a book, right?
Yes,
So let's see. Hopefully, another couple of years. I don't know. Maybe I will write. I might not write.
right.
So
But
let's see.
but
Yeah.
in our case, whatever you write, you can run by me, right?
Absolutely.
And I'll tell you, is this good or it's not so good, or it needs work. And if it's really good, I have an agent, which I can give your book to the agent, which goes into advice number one and two. And then that agent can see if they could sell the book to a publisher, because most publishers only accept books through agents. They do not just accept books, submissions. So they require agents because they expect the agents to filter out all the bad stuff. They
Mm.
don't have time for that.
Wow. So I'll keep that in mind, Steve. Okay.
Yep,
So I'm going to write a book. If I do a draft, I will reach out to you.
absolutely. The way I found my agent was through another author. And then once that agent had my book, the first one, he sold it within a week. So I had tried, but that agent sold it in the first week he had it because one, it has a great name, the 10-Day
Mm.
MBA.
Yeah.
He read the book and he goes, this is good writing and there's a market for it and there's demand for it. And he was right, That's that's why it keeps selling year after year. It's been
Mm.
around for 20 some years and it's in the fifth edition. So we're good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Great.
All
So,
righty.
so
Thank
Steve, thank you
you.
then for taking time and doing this podcast with us.
All righty. Take care.
You too.